Good morning, Breakfast with Bacon fans. I have brought back someone who is one of my favorites. I think millions of people should be watching the show. Actually, I think every man, every woman should be watching the shows that I do with Dr. Joe Malone. They are so invaluable especially for our screwed up culture. It's so screwed up sexually, morally. And this doctor is brilliant, in my opinion. I just want to make sure to say he has his degree is your PhD, right? Is in health and human performance, or did I already mess it up? Because I know that's your specialty. Your
No,
PhD is
that's the degree. That's the
in health
overall
and
degree.
human performance. I'm going to do this. Your minor is in neuropsychology with a specialization in women's health and sexual wellness. I mean, so a man who studies a woman, most girls are like, man, I want to marry that guy, right? Because he's trying to help us understand ourselves. He's been on my show before. We talked about his book, which was Battles of the Sexes. And I have to read the tagline: Raising Sexual IQ to Lower Sexual Conflict and Empower Lasting Love. Go look for that show. I'll actually put a copy of it, a link to it in the show notes here. Then the last time he was on, we talked about what men need to know about women and what women need to know about men. And these were not just, oh, she likes to have hours. This was deep differences about our sexual uh, building blocks, our mental capacities, but the neuroscience and those things that are saying this is just the way we're wired. I have sent the last show to several people, including parents of teenagers, who say, tell this to your children so we can try to keep them from hookup culture. So it's a long introduction, but I wanted to make sure you knew just how valuable my guest is. I'm going to say up front, just because of our past conversations, that you probably aren't going to want your children to listen to the show until after you've listened to it first, because we just kind of talk about this stuff that, you know, maybe the words other people don't use. So I want you to listen to this show and learn about yourself, learn about others, because today now our topic is going to be what men need to know about men and what women need to know about women, what we need to know about ourselves. And does modesty have anything to do with that? Dr. Joe Malone, take it away.
Yes, it does, Christine. And what a great introduction. Thank you. I wish I was just as good as what you say.
Well, I think you are.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
What do I not know about myself that I really need to know?
Well, starting off, and we don't have to worry about you and probably a lot of your listeners and watchers, but modesty is a huge element that's missing these days. There was a woman in the recent past named Wendy Shallot who wrote A Return to Modesty, a book about how modesty for females is a natural instinct. And in my research, I've discovered that I believe she's right about that. But as you said so well earlier in your opening, our society and our culture has really screwed that up and really made women and girls feel like they have to be immodest in order to be able to be, popular and be able
attractive?
to be, yeah,
Yeah.
and attractive and get dates and that type of thing. But you know, I'd like to start off our discussion with just a couple quick verses from the Bible that kind of again show God, again, he's our manufacturer. He's the one who made us.
Yeah.
Show his attitude towards, again, especially female modesty. It's not that males don't need to be modest as well, but as we discussed last time, and I'll kind of review quickly, the male mind and the female mind or brain, however you want to put it, are built in a way that the male brain is very susceptible to sexual cues and to just how a girl or a woman looks, as far as basically having kind of a weakness for sexual stimuli. I'll get to that in a minute, but here's the Bible verses. One of them from Proverbs 11:22 is, like a gold ring in a pig's snout is a beautiful woman who shows no discretion. So again, we probably have all known someone like that, a beautiful woman that shows no discretion. It's kind of ruins it's like a ring in a pig's snout, a beautiful, gold ring. Another one from the New Testament, 1 Timothy 2:9-10, is pretty clear. I also want the women to dress modestly with decency and propriety, adorning themselves not with elaborate hairstyles or gold or pearls, or expensive clothes, but with good deeds appropriate for women who profess to worship God. Now, I don't think he meant, for women not to look nice and not to, specifically things like pearl necklaces, things like that. But I think we all know, everybody that's watching and listening knows what a woman who is dressed inappropriately looks like and what one who is dressed appropriately looks like. So, and again, especially to the younger set, um, he makes those the prophets and the people who wrote the Bible point those truths out to young women, while at the same time in Proverbs, especially Proverbs 5 through 7, they point out the folly of falling for the women in the wrong way, following your lusts, that type of thing, to young men. Proverbs 5 through 7, I have never, I've talked to a lot of men of the cloth, I guess you'd say, about it, and they cannot point to a place in the Bible where are the teachings where a young man, the teachings that are in the Proverbs, as I'm pointing out, Proverbs 5 through 7, there's nothing like that in the Bible going towards women or girls. And then there's also not anything for young men as far as the way they dress in an appropriate manner along the lines of the verses I just read to you. So to review why God gives us that wisdom, three parts of the male brain are that have to do with sex drive and sexual attraction are twice as big as in the female brain. There's the MPOA, which is medial preoptic area, which is right behind where the the optical impulses come into the brain from the eyeballs. And it's twice as big in the male and also twice as packed with neurons. Another part is the INAH3,
But
which
he's
is
got
another.
this innate inability to see laundry if it's piled up, right? So the optic nerve
Yeah.
skips that, just
He
sees,
sees scantily clad women, but he doesn't
but he
see the
doesn't see the
laundry.
laundry.
Another part is the INH3, the third interstitial nucleus of the hypothalamus. It's also twice as big in the male, twice as packed with neurons. And then the third part is the amygdala. Amygdala is the brain's command and control area
Emotion
for
center.
survival. And so it's twice as big and twice as packed with neurons. All three of those areas are sensitive to testosterone, and men usually have 10 to 20 times more testosterone than women do. Women, additionally, in their brains have something called, they have about 13 times on average more SHBG, which is sex hormone binding globulin, which inactivates the testosterone, the small amount of testosterone that they do have. So I say all that to say that you can see why God, gave the instructions that he did in Proverbs 5 through 7 for boys and young men, especially because they're so high on testosterone. Boys and young men get their highest level of testosterone at age 17. And then it really doesn't start going down until they hit 40 for about, they start going down about 1% a year. And women, again, they're at their peak of fertility from 19 to 29. And so their bodies are generally in that, in that peak fertility type of framework of a hourglass figure. As women age, there, for whatever reason, there's a chemical process that causes the estrogen, the type of estrogen they have, which is the younger women's stage, is estradiol, which makes your body want to have a hourglass figure. It changes more over to estrone, which for whatever reason, we'll have to ask God about this. Changes the fat from your lower part of your body, your buttocks and your thighs. It wants to move up to your
Your
midsection, up to your.
waist. Of course it does.
Yeah, you're
I'm
right.
fighting with that. What do you call it? Estroglobulin.
Yeah. A
I
lot
want it
of
to go
women
back where it
are.
used to be.
A lot of women are. But all that said, modesty, again, I think people take modesty lightly. By the way, that book, A Return to Modesty, it's been removed from our library. And I think that there's it's not a conspiracy theory, it's actually a conspiracy that's going on, that's wanting to get this idea of the importance of modesty and the natural instinct that a lot of women and girls have for it to be kind of removed from our consciousness. And it is very important because it kind of allows society to run the way that it should run, which is moving in a direction of romantic relationships, and then engagement and marriage, children, a family, and then again, a good community from that, and a good country from that, and then a good world actually from that. Um, so I believe that there's actual efforts being made to try to, again, quash this.
Silence the truth. Yeah.
Right, and trying to have young women feel like that they need to run around with most of their skin, most of their body showing, and the different things, the thong underwear, the different things that really get a young man's mind off of probably the things that he should have it on, and on a lustful attitude, and moves things in the direction of non-chastity, non-marital chastity. And we can see a lot of that has happened since, it's been around for beyond earlier than the 60s, but especially from the 60s forward, um, up to now. And again, I think we've talked about this before, but I think that we're moving in a direction. The pendulum is starting to swing in the other direction, but it's going to take people knowing what's going on with this and standing up against it in order to turn the pendulum back
Right.
in the direction of sexual integrity rather than basically sexual anarchy right now.
Yeah.
You have songs like, and I'm not even going to say goes beyond our amount of things that we talk about, but I think the title of it is WAP.
Just exactly what was in my mind. And I went and I looked up the lyrics, and I had my hand on my mouth the whole time. And
Yeah.
for those of you that don't know what it is, go look up the song WAP. Because even as bold as I've been on this show, that one finally is one that I cannot even say out loud. It is filthy, degrading, public. And that's what our kids are hearing. And what the title itself stands for, is something I didn't even understand as a young girl. It talks about the physiology of a female in that sense. I'm like, anyway, it's just the vulgarity. Keep going, because now you've got me into it. Ugh. Makes me want to vomit when you think of some of the stuff that is being fed to our children.
Yes, and again, it's quite the opposite from any kind of movement towards, any kind of support for modesty. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's about as vulgar as you just said as you could probably get. And I don't know if I don't I tried to ignore it once I learned about it, because I had the same feeling you did, that,
But it sticks with you. Just those 3 words. You're like, ugh.
right. And I think it might have even won a Grammy. I know I was on the Grammys. They did a live performance of it. So, I mean, things have really, the pendulum has swung towards sexual
Devolved.
anarchy.
Yeah.
Yeah, devolved is a good way to put it. So, so again, I think modesty is a quiet thing. Most people don't even talk about it these days. And like I said, they're removing perfectly good books, on it from our libraries or public libraries without most people knowing. So there's a
I,
movement. There's a push.
Well,
Go
I
ahead.
was going to say, I recently have seen 2 separate shows where one was Candace Owens was a guest on the Whatever podcast. And it was her representing conservative women, married women, against all these self-proclaimed hoes, right? These
Yeah.
girls very proudly were sex workers, and their bodies were practically completely revealed. And they talked about how wonderful it was and the things they do, and the stigma attached. And I'm thinking, here you are, a profession in the Bible that's just saying, the world's oldest profession, and here you are celebrating it, making it public, telling everyone it's good. I loved Candace Owens because she just put it out there. And then again, I saw one today actually with Michael Knowles talking to, they were called liberal feminists, but they were all of the same type of mindset, and the clothing they wore, um because one of them was, I think, a sex worker, or I mean, just the fact that what is that channel, the one, fans only fans, right?
OnlyFans. Yeah.
Yeah, so like these people are like, oh, that's how I make my money on there. And the breast implants were huge, young girls though, and then the shirt covered just barely made it past the areolas. And so, and then of course you could see all things that we used to use bras to cover up so you didn't see, like nipples, for instance. And I know men are visually stimulated and women are not, though many women try to argue with me and say, oh, women, I'm like, no, we're not visually stimulated. Doesn't mean we don't get aroused. If you're watching porn, doesn't mean we don't like a good looking man. But the point of it is, even as a woman, I'm looking and I'm like, how do I not see all that you're showing me? And how does it not make the mind, how does it not affect one sexually? And it was just very, very sad, Joe. It was so sad to think, and these are stunning girls, by the way, and I'm thinking you could be so much, and yet you've devolved, or into
Yeah.
these creatures that your only purpose is sex with people who don't even love you.
Right.
Anyway, I just had to put that out there because it was just made me so sad and angry and all at the same time.
I completely agree. And, I was just talking to somebody the other day, Christine, that runs maternity homes. So they're part of the pro-life movement, and they run maternity homes. And she was asking me, why would girls, young women, and she was familiar with my work because we did a video together, not a podcast, but a video for this pro-life,
Organization.
thank you, organization. Yes. And but she said the girls that come to us are exactly the one like what you're describing. She said they haven't ever had a positive relationship with a man. She said they're used to being abused. They're used to being just
Used and
used and tossed around, and that type of thing. And she said, she said, I'm familiar with your, what you've taught about vasopressin and the bonding, and there you need to have a chaste romantic courtship in order to have the kind of relationship, marriage that you want to have going forward. But she said these girls are so far from that, and she said, what causes that? Why is it different now than it used to be? And I think just what you're describing, what our society has allowed to happen with the like things like OnlyFans and pornography and accepting cohabitation the way that it has, it's put women in such a terrible position because many or most of them want to have what you're describing as far as a good, solid relationship. They want to have a marriage, they want to have children, they want to have a family, but it's been cheapened down with everything we're talking about here, down to the point where again modesty is made fun of, and women who and men, but women especially, that cherish marriage for I mean cherish sex for marriage, are ostracized, in society. So
yeah.
even the term, and I've found myself wanting to, I'm avoiding the terms that the left uses, like sex worker as opposed to prostitute, because when you stop and think about it, they have they've tried to normalize everything that used to be for the right reasons.
Stigmatized.
Yeah, stigmatized.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's a great way to put it. I mean, there's the example of sex worker, the way that they're calling it that. There's for prostitution. There's sex positivity for promiscuity, and there's probably a bunch more. Um, Sociosexuality for your tendency to be promiscuous and that type of thing. So, and your a willingness to read porn or watch porn or whatever they would call it, that sociosexuality. So, anyway, it's a
So
very
sad.
clever but very diabolical
He
push.
who owns the language owns the message. I have my PhD in communication. You think of
Exactly.
the pedophiles are now being called minor attracted persons, and we're not supposed to offend them by calling them pedophiles. We're supposed to call them maps because it's a nicer word. And yeah,
Right.
God
Well,
himself is going to have to come down, Joe, and fix this. It's gotten so far that I don't see society ever saying, oh, too much. Let's go back. God
yeah,
himself
well,
has got to do
I
this.
I believe that maybe that's what's happening now with all the commotion we have that's going on, and hopefully that's going to be the process that we're going to see work out. But
Well, look
and
at
we can
Sodom
all
and Gomorrah, right? I mean, they
yeah.
didn't they didn't decide what they were doing was bad, so God's like, yeah, lightning bolt, let's redo.
Let's
Noah,
yeah,
flood,
yeah,
redo.
exactly. And there's that course of action, and then there's hopefully we could be like Nineveh, where they decided, hey, doing things God's way might be a good idea.
Yeah, that's true. Let's be
That's
Nineveh.
that's what I'm hoping for. But
Yeah.
it's people like you and I that I think that can help that to happen, because I don't think most people are conscious. They see it, they observe it, they know that things are different, especially people our age, my age, and your age, which I don't think is the same necessarily. But people that are over 35, 40, that we know that things are going in the wrong direction, especially in America, um, Europe even more so. But America,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, has lost its way. So if we can have people help get back on that track, then I think things can work out. If we're in the end times, and this is the end times, then it'll work out the way that
That
the
God
Bible is.
intends it to, either way.
Yeah. So, but I wanted to right up front say that modesty is underappreciated. It's not recognized for how important it is in the way that sexuality between women and men needs to work. Because as you said earlier, that young woman you were referring to could have been so much. She has this beauty, she has this
Yeah.
aura even probably about her. She has what I and others that I work with would call a superpower, the superpower of sexual integrity if she practices it. And she's going to go a long way with if she has sexual integrity working for her. But unfortunately, usually doesn't end well for the ones that are doing what you're describing. And that
On a
brings us.
positive note, though, did you see that two people that I am aware of, a girl named Nala from OnlyFans was making $9 million doing the crazy things that you do with porn. And anyway, she became a Christian. And she's like, and every day God challenged me and I realized my immodesty. So not only did she become a Christian, she doesn't want to tempt any men. So she dresses modestly. And then there's another girl, the B or something, also left. And she is a devout Latin mass going Catholic, wears a veil, keeps herself covered. And she's like, the beauty of Christ is so much. And I'm so glad that he has forgiven me of all my many, 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 many sins, she said. I mean, so it is wonderful to see when God touches a heart, but what you're saying actually happens as a result of that. They do become modest because something happens. God opens their eyes. So anyway, enough of
That's
my
a
interruptions. What were you
No,
going to
that's a
say?
great point. I'm glad it's not an interruption. This is a discussion. And then along that same line, I had somebody again just the other day that described to me something similar. They said that they work in a pregnancy center that's near a big university, and they said that this sorority woman kept coming to them, and of course she had like STDs, this time, and scared that she was pregnant another time. But anyway, they asked her, why do you keep coming and you keep behaving the way you're doing? But you have all these problems, and she said, well, I don't know how to not do it. She said, nobody in my sorority does anything different. We all do the same thing. And the woman, just this kindest woman, she said to her, there's nobody in your whole sorority that is any different. She had to think. She said, "Oh yeah, there's this one girl, but she's different than everybody else." She said, "Why don't you go and ask her why she does what she does?" And she said, "Okay, I will." And she did. And she asked her, and come to find out, she was a devout Christian and the only one in the sorority. And
Wow.
she started kind of like the story you just related. She started going to church with this girl, and then the next thing you know, there was like three of them that were going to church together, and then the next thing you know, it ended up the whole sorority
Wow.
ended up going,
That's
um, and
wonderful.
they changed the way they were dressing and everything and conducting themselves. So it does happen, and so it's just a matter of again, I think these young women need leadership, and if they can get a little bit of leadership, get a little bit of social support, it can change the whole thing around. Because again, from my research and from people like Wendy Shallot, who wrote the modesty book, I believe it's a natural instinct that's there, and it rubs women the wrong. Most women, about a 10% exception. It rubs most women the wrong way to not live that kind of lifestyle, to live the
Yeah.
kind of cheap dressing lifestyle.
Yeah.
So, so that brings us to what women need to know about themselves. Now, some of the women that might not, mind too much dressing and acting like that might have a situation in their past, and this is really big, I think, science for women to know. They might have a situation in their past that is probably in most cases not their fault, meaning that they got abused, they got sexually abused when they were young. And what we found on the research on that is that these girls that have been when they've experienced sexual arousal at a younger than ordinary age, especially much younger, they end up being more, as I'll use the term, that they popularly use. They become have higher sociosexuality, meaning,
They become loose.
yeah, they become more open to casual sex and more open to pornography and anything else along that line. So that's something that a woman, if they find themselves kind of in that minority, that 10 to 15% that are seem to be okay with hookup culture and seem to be okay with that whole lifestyle, if they look back in their memory, there might be something there. That's something that maybe in their past. There's other things that can contribute to it. Bipolar, being manic, bipolar. Other things that where there's higher testosterone exposure in utero than would normally a girl baby would normally have, like PCOS, um, congenital adrenal hyperplasia, CAH. I won't take the time to go into all this, but they all have the baby, the female baby being exposed to higher levels of testosterone than they would normally, which causes their brain to be organized more in a male typical way. And so they have a tendency to be more sexually aggressive than the average woman would. But in general, most women will have the instinct that we talked about, the modesty instinct. Let's just call it. Another thing that women need to know about themselves, though, that's really, really important, and most women don't, is that alcohol is if there's anything that ever comes close to being an aphrodisiac for women, it would be alcohol because it raises their testosterone levels.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and especially, I mean, it raises their testosterone levels and lowers their inhibitions. So the frontal cortex inhibitions are lowered at the same time that the testosterone is raised. Women, as we said earlier, don't have very much testosterone. They have, again, a tenth or a 20th of the amount that men do. Men are used to testosterone and its effects because testosterone is a sex-seeking hormone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Estrogen is a sex-receptive hormone. So when women get this testosterone rise, and especially if it's within what we call their fertile window, and their fertile window is about day 8 of their cycle through about day 14. It's the time in the cycle that they can actually become pregnant. And all of this makes sense if you look at it from a marriage, a married situation and promoting pregnancy and birth, of children. It doesn't make sense though if they're single and they're sexually active and they're single. So within that fertile window, again, to be very specific for young women and women that are listening, day 1 is the first day of their period when it starts. Day 5 generally is about when the period ends. So that next week, day 8, and then again through it about day
So about
14.
3 days after your period ends.
Correct. It starts there. That the estrogen and the testosterone starts rising naturally, and progesterone staying low. So during that time period, and this is again another important thing for women to realize, especially the young ones, because they're not used to it. They're just kind of maybe starting out on their cycle. Their estrogen increases by 200 times during that time period. During that fertile window, their estrogen levels go up 200 times, which is amazing and extraordinary. So you combine that with alcohol, again, party situation, maybe, whatever. And it doesn't even take that much alcohol. Small amount of alcohol will
Yeah.
raise their testosterone, which they're not used to. They're not used to the sex drive effects of higher testosterone. So that's where a lot of girls and women find themselves in trouble because they're acting uncharacteristically sexually aggressive. And I've worked with a lot of fraternities and sororities, even now across the country, members of them. And fraternities, they don't know the science necessarily, but they know the behavioral effects of having.
Alcohol on women. Yeah.
Yeah, and so almost everything that they do that has to do with women has an alcohol component to it. So that's a big one for young women. The other thing that ties back to modesty is that during that fertile window, regardless of alcohol use or not, during that fertile window, day 8 through 14, what the research has shown is that women, and this is basically unconscious for the most part, or subconscious. People are using that term now, and I think it's a better, more appropriate because it's really below consciousness, but it's there. It's pushing the conscious mind. they start dressing less modestly. What they found is during that fertile
Huh.
window, day 8 through 14. So they'll again, if it's a married situation, and you and your husband and you're dressing more flirtatiously for your husband, that's all good. That's all natural. But if it's you're in a single situation and you're going out to parties and you're going out to the bar and whatever else, women need to know that about themselves, that they'll have that tendency to have a more of a flirtatious attitude, dress more
It is
flirtatiously.
just so weird. It's in a cool way. It's like God thought of everything, you know?
Yeah, but and the way it has been in the past, when you think of our historic folks, our ancestors, they were generally married, by right around age
Exactly.
20.
That's
Yeah,
what I was going to say next. So that's okay.
yeah, exactly. So it's within the bounds of marriage. But now that we have, the average age of marriage for a woman in America is 29, and the average age for a man is 30, and in the UK it's even older. It's 39 and 40. So that's their
Wow.
average age of marriage. You have a lot of, and puberty starting, 2 years earlier. So 2 years earlier puberty, and you have this long stretch. Gotta get my hands up here. Long stretch, of sex drive and reproductive capability, but you don't
Yeah.
have,
The
again, the
spouse to
young.
do it with because you're fighting it because society is saying to wait until you're old when you really don't have the sex drive, want the family.
Right. I mean, there's 80%, 30% of our young people these days, both male and female, are ending up in, childless. But out of that 30%, I gotta get my percentages right here. Out of that 30% of the overall number of them, uh, 10% of them, 10% of that 30% cannot have babies because they're infertile. Another 10% don't want to have babies, so that's 20%. But so 80% of the 30% end up childless, but not wanting to be childless because they're aging themselves out, as you just said.
Right.
Again, the women's peak fertility is 19 to 29, and men's is 24 to 26. And if you look at a fertility graph of women, men stays fairly high. So it's not the man isn't the issue so much, but women's fertility drops off a cliff after about age 32. It drops by about 50% in the next 3 years, and then it drops the rest of the way on up to 40 generally. I mean, women still do have babies, they get pregnant after 40, but it's extremely rare. So I say all that to say this, and you said the key phrase earlier, when they were getting married earlier, it all worked well. Again, being flirtatious
Right.
with your husband, during that fertile window, is great. It's fine. But the way it is now with our, 25 through 29, or even 20 through 29-year-old women, that aren't married, all kinds of problems you can see from that. So that's number one. Number two, in conjunction with that, female anatomy, women should know that female anatomy, you mentioned it earlier, by its nature, makes them more vulnerable to STDs. And again, my wife, there aren't very many people that are allowed to censor me. My wife is one of them. Actually, she's the only one. And she told me, hey, don't talk about this certain part of this because it'll embarrass women. So I'm not going to talk about that
In
part
public or at all?
at all.
Oh, okay. Well, then you
Well,
can tell me after we go off the air.
yeah, I'll be happy to. But she said, getting across the point I want to make, the female anatomy, because of the way of its characteristics, is more conducive to bacterial growth, problems with
Well, because it's
viruses.
warm, dark, and wet, right? I mean, isn't that where bacteria grows?
And that's what she told me not to say.
Oh, well, I can say that. I mean, it just makes scientific sense that you grow mold in
Right,
dark places and
right. A woman,
moisture and
I think she's okay with a woman saying it. She didn't want me saying it.
yeah, yeah.
So,
Well, and I understand that. I tell your wife I love
yeah.
her. I respect that. But
Okay.
yeah, and we are also the receptors, right? So
Right.
the man goes in and if he's got the STD, he's depositing it in our receptor. And so yeah,
Correct.
women do get it more. I had learned that a while ago, and I think women should know that. It's so sad.
It's twice the rate. Yeah. And then the other thing is the male anatomy doesn't allow any kind of entrance into the inner workings
Of
the
his
male
body.
body.
Right.
But the female body certainly does, with the fallopian tubes, opening up to the pelvic cavity. And so pathogens that do get in, or can be deadly, to women, whereas they cannot be deadly generally to men. So overall, here's the risk. Here's the risk factor. Women on average have 8 times higher HIV risk, 8 times, and 4 times higher gonorrhea risk. And the one that really should be taken off the table for everybody, but especially for women, anal sex raises a woman's risk of HIV by 17 times. So a woman having anal sex, and again, from what I understand, pornography is full of portraying that these days, has a HIV risk that's raised 17 times by having that. So I always tell my college audiences, let's just take anal sex off the table because it's well totally unnatural for one thing, but secondly it's extremely dangerous, to whoever's receiving it as
I
you,
have
you're
so
pointing out.
many young girls come up to me, Joe. Thank God they trust me. They're told so many lies. Like if you have anal sex, you're still a virgin because you haven't broken your hymen. Second thing, I don't know from experience, but I do know it's extremely painful, because just the angling of it's painful, right? And then what I'm learning, which you know more of than me, is just again the amount of disease. I would just assume that's a place where, the yucky comes out of our body, and then so you get that in any other part of you. It's just so sad. But and all of that aside, it's degrading.
Yeah,
It's degrading because it's not there to create life. So anyway, so these girls come to me and they say, my boyfriend's telling me, and I'm a bad girlfriend if I don't do this. That all the good girls are. Am I bad if I don't do that? Should I be? I'm like, no, you should not be, and you are good, and he's wrong, and it's so their instinct knows that it's not a good thing, but what people are saying, mostly men, I would suppose, porn things, are telling them that it is normal,
right.
telling them things like threesomes are normal, telling them all kinds of things. I would have never thought there'd be talking of things like bestiality in reality conversation, but that now there are some sex ed programs. Actually, I don't even know if well, I know I didn't tell you this, but did you see where recently a school, where was it? Might have been England, but were they taught with images and video bestiality to children in elementary school? And I think it was fifth graders. Some of them vomited and left the room and called their parents, and then the parents were yelled at. And the parents were like, you didn't tell us about this. And anyway, so they pulled their kids out of school because the school said that they wouldn't guarantee anything. But I bring this up because here I am having a conversation on a podcast with something that is trying to be infiltrated in mainstream, which is so against the normal human mind that Satan has to use this to normalize it. He has to keep trying. And so anyway, some of these people are being told to do these things. And your job and my job is to say, not only no, but hell no. No, you're right. Fight that.
Yeah, yeah, I couldn't agree more, and I agree with what you said earlier that I hope that as many people as possible watch these conversations of ours because I think they could make such a positive difference
Yeah.
in not only their lives, but as you're alluding, their children's, I mean, probably even grandchildren's lives, because it's getting worse by the minute. But again, I don't know how much further down it can go than what we've been describing, but we're definitely there. The UK and Europe in generally is what you're describing as far as those kinds of so-called sex ed that is supposed to, years ago when they brought it in, it's supposed to, prevent problems, but actually it's actually, I think, causing problems,
It
and
did.
it's normalizing the things, as you said, that should never be normalized. One of my friends in the UK, along the lines of what you're describing, um, described naked education. They have what they call naked education now, where you probably haven't heard of this, and our watchers and listeners probably haven't either. But if you can imagine this, they have 6 or 7 adults come into these like third, fourth grader,
Classrooms say.
yeah, or even assemblies, and basically, again, from different ages, and that type of thing, 20-year-old, 40-year-old, 70-year-old, just various ages. And it's called naked education. They all just take off their clothes in front of them. These adults take their clothes off in front of them, and then the moderator walks around and points out the differences, between the different age groups and their, their genitalia and, what's happening here, what's happening there. And again, these people are stark naked, and they're
They're
adults
getting
standing.
off on it. They love it.
Yeah, evidently. And the school districts, or school, whatever they're called over there, they're
Condoning
they're
it.
yeah, they're sanctioning it. So, and they're calling that, they're saying that that is going to prevent problems. And actually, I mean, what is that going to do to a little child? I mean, it's not going to be pleasant. They're probably, some of them are throwing up, and
Let
running
me
out
just
as
say
well.
to the camera, to anybody involved in that, you will have to answer to God.
Yeah.
God help you. Answer to
Yeah.
God when he says, why did you do that? Because he'll know your heart.
Yeah. Naked education. That's what it's called. Naked education. So, um, pretty horrendous. Um, Getting back to the opposite, and what we're trying to teach to try to prevent problems. Young women's sexual behavior affects their future health. This is another thing that the young women especially need to know. Again, in the middle of all this mess that we're talking about, that's being pushed on them. Early promiscuity leads to higher chances of vaginal and cervical cancer. So again, there's prices to be paid for the end result of what we're talking about here. None or minimal number of pregnancies and none or minimal breastfeeding raises her lifetime chances of developing ovarian and uterine cancer. So you think of your classic Catholic family, procreation, open to life and everything, the large number of children. What I discovered in my research is that's really good for the women, really good for their reproductive cancer, heading it off, preventing it. Delayed childbearing and fewer pregnancies raise the risks of lifetime development of breast cancer. So again, the fewer pregnancies and delaying it causes higher chances of breast cancer. A woman who has her first child around the age of 20. Here's an important fact for your audience, Christine. A woman who has her first child around the age of 20 has half the chance of developing breast cancer as a woman who has her first child around the age of 30. So
That's
those
me. I was 19.
There you go. And again, it's half the chance of having breast cancer. And again, breast cancer is the number one, is the most prevalent cancer diagnosis in the world now since 2020. And we know that 99% of people who get breast cancer are women. So you talk about women's health, you talk about women's health and sexual wellness, the things I just mentioned, the classic getting married younger, starting to have children younger, having several children, having a lot of children, breastfeeding them. Those are all really, really good and really natural when you think about it, going into our history of the way a woman's body is supposed to work. It's supposed to work that way. And so all this, birth control and, not being married and on birth control and casual sex, hooking up, that's so unnatural, so
Not
unnatural
even
from our,
beginning to talk about the psychological consequences.
yeah. And then the psychological consequences are terrible as well. We have the girls, 57% of them in 2021. That's the latest, I think, research they have on this. 57% of them were depressed, anxious, and a bunch of them were considering suicide and that type of thing. And I think, again, it's a direct result of this unnatural situation. It's going against their sexual nature, the things that we're talking about. Finally, women with 10 or more lifetime sexual partners have a 91% higher risk of developing cancer overall. So it's about 10% per extra sexual partner of developing
Yeah.
cancer. For anybody's, information on men, it's about 64%. So having 10 or more sexual partners for men is about is 64% higher chance of developing cancer in their lifetime. Now, if we've talked about hormonal birth control before, we can skip over this part, but if not, I'll just go ahead and do it because I can't
I was
remember if
gonna
we
say,
talked.
we may have, but let's put it out there real quick.
Well, another thing for women to know about themselves and their sexual situation is that hormonal birth control effects, a lot of them are really negative. One of them is, and this is kind of a amazing thing, but what it does, hormonal birth control, it makes a woman's body and mind think that they're in the second half of their cycle all the time, the luteal, they call it luteal half of their cycle, as opposed to follicular, which is the first half. In the luteal half of the cycle, they're generally attracted to men who would, they're not the bad boy type. They're not necessarily highly genetically fit. They're not the tall, dark, and handsome necessarily guy.
They're more
Kind of.
effeminate, maybe?
Yeah, more effeminate. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And also maybe more like a family member, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, again, God, I believe, gave us these two halves of the cycle to balance things out. So they're not attracted to in what they would be in the follicular first half, especially that, the fertile window we talked about, the day 8 through 14.
Yeah.
So the scenario is a lot of these young women these days are on birth control and they're having casual sex with different guys. They end up, getting steady with one guy, and at some point they get married. They're on birth control though because they want to be able to have casual sex all through it. And then when they go off birth control after they've married this guy, they find out they're not attracted to him anymore. They're attracted to, as you said, a more masculine,
Yeah.
more of the bad boy, tall, dark, and handsome guy that's 3 cubicles down where they work. So that's a nightmare scenario. Another thing that it does is it overloads the HPA hypothalamus pituitary axis, and increases cortisol to the point where they don't have your normal cortisol reaction to different things that might bother you otherwise. So it flattens women out as far as their things that
Cortisol
would
is your
just.
stress hormone. So you're saying if that stays level, you're just always kind of walking on melancholy, which may sound like it's not a bad thing, but we need to
Yeah,
keep our
it literally overloads it to the point where it doesn't react. It doesn't react the way it should to normal stressors. So there's no highs and lows. There's no ups and downs, and there's no
well,
sensitivity. There's no sensitivity to things that should bother you, and would normally kind of warn you off of things. So the other thing is, and this is a huge study they did in Denmark, on over 1 million young women, the younger ones, especially 15 to 19, that were on especially the big dosages, the patch, the IUD, the vaginal ring, they were in the hundreds of percent, 200 to 300% more likely to have depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, suicidal attempts. And it was the only, it was better in the ones that were older than 19, but better meaning like 80, 90%, higher chance. Some of them that were depressed, and then when they went off, they never stopped being depressed. And some of them were infertile, of course, which is the goal. When they went off, they never became fertile again, too. So
mm,
there's those things. Um, Hormonal birth control generally dampens sex drive. And again, maybe that's good that it goes along if you're not married. And you uh, combine antidepressants with it, and it just kills basically women's sex
your
drive.
desire. Yeah.
Yeah. And finally, within the trials, the original trials, the blood clot risk was really underreported, not appreciated, and cancer risk. There's different cancers a few cancers that actually seem to help, but then several that it is carcinogenic for. So hormonal birth control, if women can avoid it, unless they have a really good reason for it, it's something they probably want to skip, because I think down the road it's going to be looked at in a lot of ways like smoking is looked at now as looking back in the past, especially when doctors prescribe it for like acne and little
Yeah.
things like and heavy
I have a
period.
family member who puts all of her children on it for acne because she says, this way, if they do get sexually active, they're covered. And I'm like, you know, this family member doesn't know God either, so she doesn't have any care about that. But
Well, the Catholic approach to it, the Catholic approach to the NFP and natural family planning, for those that might not know it, that's like perfect approach, I believe, as a professional. That's I'm giving you my professional opinion. Matter of fact, I may not have said this before, but that's one of the main things that drew me to the Catholic Church was how accurate this understanding that I'm talking about right now, the
yeah,
Catholic Church has. So,
yeah.
okay, so that's what women need to know.
About women.
Yeah, about women. What men need to know about themselves. I'm going to try to make this quick because I don't know how much time we've taken, but um, I don't want to
We
take
have
too
about
much.
15 minutes ish.
Okay, well, that's about perfect, probably. Testosterone reaches its highest levels in the late teens and 20s, early 20s. So, like I said, 17 is the actual highest level in guys. And I've
I
named
got two
this.
grandsons right now. They're 17 and 15, about to switch over. So it helps me understand a lot.
I hope it helps. I'm glad about that, and I hope it helps a lot of people listening. And every time I give this talk, I did it last week, and there's people in the room, mothers in the room, say, my sons, this is going to be really helpful for me to
Hmm.
understand them. So, I've named this the testosterone trap because we do, speaking for myself and others that have lived through this, we do a lot of stupid things because of it back then, and also the male danger zone because these are round numbers because it's a little bit less than 4, but it's very close to 4. Males of this age have about, I'm going to get this finger up here, have about a 4 times greater chance of than females this age during this time period. During this male danger zone, let's say 15 to 25, of dying from homicide, suicide, car accidents, or drug overdose than a female would of the same age during that time period in
So
their
at
life.
17?
Yeah, well, yeah. Well, it's really it starts even a little bit younger because the boy's testosterone goes up by 30 times from age 13 to 15. So,
And he's likely to die of what?
um, 4 different things: homicide, which would be
Mm-hmm.
somebody killing you; suicide, killing
Killing
yourself;
yourself.
drug overdose, which again that
Yeah.
happens a lot these days, and car accident
And this
because
is because of the reckless behavior that's associated with testosterone?
right, at least partially, and of course again, I didn't mention this earlier, but the brain matures from the back and low to the front and high. And that front and high is real important because it's the prefrontal cortex is where our seat of our judgment and inhibition in the brain. One other thing that I should mention is that the GABA system in the brain, gamma aminobutyric acid, which is the brain's main inhibitory neurotransmitter system, the receptors aren't formed until about that time, until about 18 through about 24, 25. So it's forming during that, like the college years, the undergraduate college years, but
And
it's
what does
still,
that do? That's the prefrontal cortex? Which part?
well, it's housed in the prefrontal cortex. It's the GABA, that's GABA, GABA. This is real recent research, but
Mm-hmm. And the GABA
gamma
is responsible for what?
for the inhibitory process in the brain. It's the largest inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. Like it would compare to dopamine being the highest, or adrenaline maybe being or epinephrine, however you want to say it, being the largest stimulator, system. This is the largest inhibitor system in the
Okay, so
brain.
we want the GABA to kind of sometimes inhibit our testosterone from making us go too far, but
Yeah, and
that
it isn't it
not
isn't.
is not developed yet. So
It,
they're fighting this impulsiveness.
yeah, if you compare
With
it to a car, they're all gas pedal and no brake.
got it.
So, but
That's a nice way to say it.
yeah, that's the teenage years. So the picture is starting about age 13, their testosterone goes up by 30 times. And again, that they have hardly any prefrontal cortex, and they have hardly any GABA available to
They're
them.
just full steam
But for
ahead.
starting about 18, that starts changing with the GABA. The GABA receptors start being formed, and so that's why sometimes a college student can be a lot different behaviorally than a high school student. So I say that all that to say that's probably what's behind, as to your question, the 4 times greater chance, of suicide, homicide, car accident,
Yeah.
or drug overdose. It's and to your question, it's acting out. Yeah, it's most of us from acting out and being careless about things. And also the next part, males murdering males occurs most from ages 18 to 25. So young males killing other young males, and more frequently in unmarried rather than married men. So once again, they would have been married. 75% of everybody that was 18 or over in 1960 were married. So we have, it's down to 48% now. So we've got like a 30% droppage there. So we have a lot more young men out there in the city streets, etc., shooting each other and that type of thing.
And they're not tamed by a wife. I mean, there is value in that. When you have a wife and you want to please her, because we've talked about that, the man's desire is to please his wife. If he doesn't have a wife, and she's
Right.
not there to say, honey, you better not do that. I'd think twice, or even help in more of his paternal phases. So that would make sense too. I mean, God made women and men so complementary.
Exactly. Along that line, this is another thing most people don't know, but it's important to know. Um, there is a 2 year difference in life expectancy for an unmarried woman. So 2 years less life expectancy for an unmarried woman. Guess how much it is for an unmarried man?
10 years.
You're right. Exactly right.
I've
Right,
had
right
enough
around
shows with you.
right around 10 years. So what you're talking about there plays into this. A woman has that effect on a man and a lot of other good effects on a man. And again, our society and our culture has shot itself in the foot by going down this promiscuous pathway. And again, the women listening to listening to the society and going against these instincts, like the instinct for modesty and all of that. And so again, we have nature, we have science with us, and so that's the good news about this. Getting back to the young males, the young unmarried, as you pointed out, males, and that's what I point out to my especially my college audiences: is unmarried. It's a key part of it
Yeah.
because if they're married, they would have other directions that their energy was going in than that. And the other thing is one thing I want to mention, so don't forget. This is really important, Christine. And this is probably something you maybe knew already, but maybe your audience doesn't. Uh, the research has shown, waiting until you're 29 or 30, which is our average ages of our kids getting married, young people getting married, has seemed to be good because there's better statistics on them that the marriage is lasting, that type of thing, not experiencing divorce, which we all want to see. We all want to see marriages, go the distance. But there's a big caveat on recent research that they've had, and this is something really important for everybody here. Everybody that has a young people that are important to them, and even the young people themselves. The exception to that rule of waiting until you're 29 or 30 years old, and again that long period of sex drive, and you're supposed to remain chaste, and it's so tough to do. What they found was with women, and this is a big as they call it, big number, in the data pool as well, 50,000 young women in America. The ones that cohabited, and were casually sexually active, and then in other cases they cohabited. Of course, they were having sex, unmarried sex there. The ones that did that, it was true on the statistics that they were better if they waited till they're older as far as the marriage lasting longer. They found out though that the very best chances of a young woman's marriage lasting was for her to get married sometimes between age 22 and 30, but especially on that lower end towards 22. So getting married younger and not having sex until they got married. The ones that didn't have sex, didn't have casual sex, and also didn't cohabit with a man that got married at those younger ages have the highest rates of their marriages being successful, being happy and lasting, going the distance. So once again, that goes back to what the Bible says about premarital sex, non-marital sex, and that
Right.
type of thing. So and getting married to me seems like the proper in
Order of operations. I mean, it just seems,
exactly, because I think we're setting our children up to fail by telling them they need to wait until they're around 30 because
yeah, get married, have sex. Oh, kids aren't going to wait, then have them get married. Oh, they won't be ready. Well, it's when their bodies are ready. You
exactly.
mature so much when you have a family.
It all works together. It
Yeah.
all really works together. Exactly. And maybe we can have a conversation about that on another day. More than half of these murders. Okay, I forgot one. Around 2/3 of males. Okay, so we got most of the murders in our society happen between males that are 18 to 25. Around 2/3 of males killing other males results from social conflict rather than crime. So it isn't so much the drug deals. It isn't so much of that. It's social conflict. All right. So again, just what you'd expect from unmarried males. More than half of those murders are related to status competition. So it's a status competition between the males, the majority of these young males that are killing each other. Again, think of your cities, think of your gangs, think of all the different things that we know are going on constantly. And that brings us to this. 93.3% of people that are incarcerated in federal prisons are in the US are male. So we only have less than 7% of our people that are incarcerated in
They're
the United States
females. Yeah.
prisons that are female. And again, that's not an accident. That's a biological sex difference. Finally, now just like we had women that are twice as likely to experience an STD with casual sex than men are twice as likely to experience overall substance abuse as women are. They're 6 times more likely to be addicted to porn. And I think after we talked about the brain differences, it
Yeah.
probably is obvious why. Their brains, this is one that everywhere I go, people look at me and they say, oh, that explains so much. Their male brains, young male brains, are physically changed by gaming addiction, where women's are not. So their brains are literally changed. That's why it sticks with them so long. I've got 35-year-old young men that I know that that are married, have been married for 10, 15 years, and they're gaming so much that it's causing problems. These various types of addictions, which all involve dopamine, the dopamine reward system in the brain, whether substance or behavioral, lead men into dopamine depleted state. Now, let's illustrate this as kind of a final thought. Dopamine is supposed to, if I can get, again, this is backwards, but dopamine is supposed to have valleys and then hills, a gentle hill and a valley and a gentle
Right.
hill, because we're supposed to have to work for,
Our
uh,
dopamine hit. That's right.
yeah, and have some pain for our pleasure and work for our play. But these days with dopamine spiking, let's say on a hookup, it comes down to where it's lower, the baseline's lower than it was before. Let's say right away again, it's porn this time. The young man experiences porn. Same thing, porn to masturbation, down lower. And let's say another next day, maybe he's hooks up with somebody else, and it goes on and on. They end up being depressed because their baseline dopamine level is so low that they don't have the energy that they used to have that dopamine gives you. So
Right.
so I say all that to say this, that what you said earlier, as far as the old school pattern of getting married younger, having babies younger, being open to babies, breastfeeding them, forming a family, is really, really, I believe, God's design for us, and it's the one that causes optimal human flourishing for both male and female.
Yeah, so
So
whatever society says, do the opposite because Satan runs culture, God runs everything else, right? And so we just have to start doing, when you see that Mae West used to be looked at the naughty girl and purity was cherished, and now the pure girls are looked at as the, you know, outcasts, and the naughty girls are looked at as the good ones. We just have to do some soul searching and wonder, where is that coming from? How's that going to end? So I'm like, eh, anything society says I should do, I want to do the opposite. And that's pretty much how I live my life, you know?
that's a good policy. And
Yeah,
what we got to do is teach young people to do that, the young single ones, because the girls, and again, I think we talked about this in the earlier episodes, but girls, young women, by practicing that, going against society, what it's telling them to do, they actually raise their value as a marriage prospect, because the young men, they aren't interested, they're not looking for promiscuous woman for their marriage partner, they're looking for them for hookup partners.
right.
And so they have a tendency to categorize the young women right away into for a good time only, or for or possible marriage. And again, in my experience, I created the women's program at the university that I was at. In my experience, in all those young women I worked with, almost all of them wanted steady. They wanted a steady relationship. They wanted relationships that there's a possibility of it, becoming a
Love and
marriage.
marriage.
And
Yeah.
yes, so when they were listening to culture, like you said, and practicing, part of the hookup culture, they were doing the exact opposite from what they needed to be doing to find what they're actually looking for. So
Physiologically, emotionally, neuroscientifically. I mean, it's just
yeah, and
everything
we can't.
points to doing things the monogamous way, the early marriage.
Exactly. That's the way God designed us. Even though it can be difficult, especially for, as I've pointed out, why for males to, if males are given the opportunity to have a promiscuous situation, it's kind of like a kid in a candy store. It's hard to get them to not eat
Yeah.
until they're sick.
Yeah.
So males need to not be given that opportunity. That's what I'm preaching, I
Yeah.
guess you'd say, is
Mhm.
females need to realize that superpower that they have. And again, the more of them that do it, the more of them that join in league with each other and live a modest, dress modestly, um, demand respect, from the young men. The young men, as I said before, if the bar is this high to access sex, they'll slither over the top of it. If it's
Right.
this high, they'll find a way to, high jump to get
Rise
up
to
there.
the occasion. That's right.
So
Right.
that's the bottom line. And again, what people that are listening to this and watching it can use this to go to their young person and say, you know, I've talked to you about this from a Christian perspective. I've talked to you about this from an ethical perspective.
Here's the
And I know that you've
science.
listened to me and I know that has an effect, but here's some additional information for you that will help you as far as seeing that science actually backs scripture. It backs what I've been teaching you, what they taught me in church, and the
Yeah.
catechism and that type of thing. It all has scientific backing. That's the message here.
If people want to hear you speak, do you travel? Do you do speaking?
I do. I have spoken at a lot of staff trainings for pregnancy help centers. So I'm trying to help pregnant resource centers. They call them different things. That seems to be very useful information, the type of thing we've talked about.
Yeah.
And also, I speak on campuses, on college campuses, especially Christian type groups on college campuses, Catholic groups. And I've just started something I think is really important and could be really good. Speaking to high school seniors, graduating seniors as they're getting ready to. It
Go
could
to
be anytime
college?
during. Yeah,
Yeah.
it could be anytime during their senior year because they're thinking
Actually
that.
seems late. You would think you'd want to talk
Yeah, well,
sooner.
what I'm speaking to them there about, hopefully there's been, SRA, sexual risk avoidance, education for them before I get to them, but I'm kind of a capper for them, hopefully. And they're just entering that GABA gateway. I call it the GABA gateway because that 18-ish year old brain is starting to change over and starting to get those GABA receptors. So now they're
That's true.
yeah. So I know having taught on the university campus, I know what's waiting for them, and most of the places they go at their orientation, they're going to be, handed condoms and told where they can go to get their STI, fixed.
Get their baby aborted.
Yeah, those three things. And they're going to be given the message that you're weird if you're not sexually active. We expect you to be sexually active. So I would like to propose to these Christian colleges, especially, let me be your orientation guy for that. Let me let me
Yeah.
let me let me talk to them. First of all, let me talk to them as they're leaving high school, because then again, let them know what's coming. Let
Call
them know that
me. We'll be a good team.
yeah, I tell you what,
It's like,
and that's
come on,
that's
guys.
actually that's
Save
actually not
yourselves.
a yeah. Well, I think you and I should put ourselves. I'm available, and I'm sure you speak quite a
Yeah.
bit yourself.
How can people find you?
They can go to my website, drjoemalone.com would be one way.
That's
They could
DRJOE, no punctuation.
no punctuation, just yeah,
DRJOEMALONE.com.
yeah. And then also they could just email me if they wanted to, Joe Malone PhD at gmail.com. So Joe Malone, same thing, JoeMalone PhD at gmail.com. They could do those two things. Yeah, and we have a group on Facebook and Instagram called Romance Revolt, and the idea behind that is we're encouraging these young people to revolt in the direction of romance. Demand romance.
Nice.
The
Nice.
especially the young women demand
I feel
romance
that
back.
people don't even know what that is these days. I feel bad for them because it's nice to have a guy show up with flowers or something. And,
Well, again,
ah,
usually my experience, Christine, with young people is that romance goes out the window as far as the guys are concerned once sex happens.
once they've
So
had sex, that's right. So make
you
him
want
work for you.
exactly, and you're worth it. You're
You
worth
are
it.
worth it. There's so much more I'd want to talk about, but I know we're over an hour here. I am going to have a link to Dr. Joe Malone's website, as well as his book, and a link to the other three shows he was on with me. Find them, watch them. They gave some very good information, stuff that, to a nice pure culture should be X-rated instead of some of the other stuff. Parents should listen to this, decide what their kids want to hear, need to hear, and when they need to hear it. And I think this is exactly the man that you want speaking to your children. He's devout, he's learned, and he, cares about body, mind, and soul. So, Joe, I appreciate you being a guest on my show as always. And
I appreciate the opportunity,
we'll
Christine.
have
Thank
you
you.
back. Well, you got a book coming out. So when your book comes out, we'll do another show.
That sounds great. I really always appreciate it. I really appreciate your understanding of this issue and your heart for it, your care for it, because that's what we need. We need adult leaders that have the right frame of mind on this, and you definitely
Thank
have
you.
it.
We do. Both of us run the same team. For those of you watching, please share this show. Share it with your friends, your family, your youth, that, you know, the ones that you know are ready for it. Go ahead and like me on social media, YouTube, Rumble, where am I? Instagram, Facebook. And also sign up for my newsletter because there's just so much of this stuff that you don't know about, where I'm speaking, other shows I've done in the past, a conference I'm having in October with other great Catholic speakers. Um, so sign up for the newsletter at breakfastwithbacon.com. And apart from that, I think we've covered everything. Joe, so you're a veteran now. I think this is your third show, so you're going to know how we end it, right?
Yes.
All right, let's see how he does. I'm Dr. Christine Bacon. You've been watching Breakfast with Bacon, and I want to remind you always to live your life.
Sunny side up.
He's an expert.